Story 1. I've been thinking a lot about this story lately, so I figured I would post it somewhere to share the experience. For context, this took place in the fall of 2020 or 2021, when I had a short stint working retail before starting college. I worked in a small store that primarily sold branded frozen meals. The storefront itself was fairly small, and because it was specialized, business wasn't usually heavy. Our checkout section consisted of a counter along the back wall, a narrow space for employees to get to and from the break room and the freezers, and then a second counter with a single cash register. There were usually only 2 of us working at a time, occasionally 3, so when there were customers in the store, one of us would be at the register, while the other made sure the freezers were stocked. I was at the register, waiting for the few customers we had to finish browsing, when the front door literally slammed open. In came a short woman, probably in her 60s or 70s, holding a bag tied shut with a ponytail holder, already radiating what could only be described as righteous fury. She stormed right up to the counter and slammed the bag down onto it. "Pierogi lady, I need a refund on this item. I cooked these pierogies for my family, and they were rock hard and disgusting." Me, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me double check the number on these so I can process your refund." I grabbed the bag, which was already damp with condensation, and tried looking for the product code. The bag was crumpled after being torn open and aggressively retied, and after looking it over, I couldn't find the code. I assumed it had rubbed off at some point since parts of the plastic were faded. Me, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't find the code on the bag. Let me just pull up the product in our system." Pierogi lady huffed and muttered while I tried to type the product's name into the register system. The system had been having issues pretty much since I started working there, with some items randomly not appearing or not showing the proper stock amount. So it wasn't surprising when nothing came up after typing the name manually. By this point, a few customers who had been browsing were beginning to line up behind Pierogi lady, who was becoming visibly more irritated the longer it took. I was starting to panic. My coworker was still in the freezer section, unaware of what was happening. As a last attempt to find the product code, I asked Pierogi lady to wait a moment and stepped out from behind the counter to check the freezers, hoping I could get the code from a price tag. The problem was, I honestly wasn't the best at my job. We were expected to know exactly where every item was and were quizzed about it regularly by the manager. For some reason, I just couldn't keep the items straight in my head. All I could think, as I rushed from freezer to freezer, was how foolish I must have looked, and how my manager would probably scold me again for not knowing that the home-style tuna casserole was in the freezer beside the creamy hash brown casserole, or for not being able to locate these stubborn pierogies anywhere. Eventually, after checking every single freezer without finding a single pierogi, I had to admit defeat. Every customer who had been browsing was now lined up, and Pierogi lady looked like she was about to burst. I hurried back behind the counter, sweating and trying not to panic. Me, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but I can't find the product code for your item anywhere." Pierogi lady, "Why do you even need that silly thing? Just give me my refund." Me, "I'm sorry, but without the code, I can't give you a refund. We have to enter the code into the system in order for the machine to process." Pierogi lady, "Let me speak to your manager." Me, "My manager isn't currently in the store, but I can." Pierogi lady, "Then get him on the phone." At this point, thoroughly convinced this whole situation was my fault, I ducked back into the employee hallway and grabbed the handset to call my manager, Ron. I was panicking, trying not to cry, and could hear Pierogi lady complaining loudly to the people in line behind her. Me, "Hi Ron, sorry to bother you, but I have a customer here asking about a refund, and I can't find the product code anywhere on the bag or in the system." Ron, "What is she trying to get refunded?" Me, "It's a bag of pierogies, but the system is glitching again, and it's not coming up. I don't think we have any in stock." Ron, "Wait, did you say pierogies?" Me, "Yes." Ron, "That can't be right. Company name hasn't manufactured pierogies in at least 5 years. I think I was genuinely stunned. On one hand, I felt relief because this wasn't my fault. On the other hand, was there really a woman in the next room trying to refund a bag of pierogies that had to be at least 5 years old? Ron told me to hand the phone to the customer, so I went back out. She was still standing at the front of the line, with a dripping bag of pierogies sitting on the counter. After I gave her the phone, I placed the bag on the back counter behind the register, so I could start ringing up the next customer, or at least I would have if Pierogi Lady had moved. Instead, she stood at the front of the line with at least 4 people waiting behind her, yelling into the phone at my manager about his disrespectful employees and her unacceptable pierogies. It took both the man in line behind her and my manager, who was still on the phone, telling her to step aside before she actually moved. She finally went to the side, still shouting, while I quickly rang up the rest of the customers. I apologized repeatedly, but every single one of them was incredibly understanding and even seemed more amused than frustrated. Eventually, Pierogi Lady hung up, stormed back to the counter, and slammed the phone down as if she were trying to break it. By the time I had finished with all of the customers, she had left, and the store was finally quiet again. At some point, my coworker Sean had come out to help me finish bagging items and then switched me out at the register. I was about to head to the back to grab the jacket and gloves we used for stocking the freezers when I noticed something. Hey, Sean, where did you put the bag that was sitting over here? Sean, what bag? Me, that old bag of pierogies the customer brought in. Did you already throw it away? Sean, oh, no, I think she took it. Somehow, while I had been distracted helping other customers, Pierogi Lady had snuck behind the counter, grabbed her bag of thawed, freezer-burned, 5-year-old pierogies and left with it. All that remained was a sad little puddle where the bag had been. Thank you for reading, if you've made it this far. I hope I did this story justice and managed to make it entertaining. I absolutely hated that job with a burning passion, but I genuinely do enjoy working in customer service, even with moments like this mixed in. I do have another story from that same job that's a completely different tone, and I've been thinking about posting it as well, so maybe I'll share it here someday too. Story 2. I'm so lucky and get to work a dream part-time job teaching little kids how to ski. It's the cutest thing I've ever seen, and I love seeing them smile the first time I take them up the bunny hill at the end of a lesson. Seriously, if you can get this job, get it. I also happen to get a very good employee discount, which is nice because after a full day, 6-ish lessons, I'm exhausted. Kids are fun, but I'm tall, so holding them upright while walking backwards in the nutcase tilt my expert boots has a number on my back. I like to reward myself with a chocolate bar, a hot dog, a pop after a full day of work, using the aforementioned amazing discount while I wait for my mom to come and pick me up. It had been a nice, warmish day, like -10 to 5°C and sunny all day long, so I had a full day of lessons with hyperactive youngsters. It was so busy that I hadn't bothered taking anyone up to the top of the hill, as even in my first lesson, the instructor fast lane was a bit too long, and it just got worse as the day went on. Also, the kids after my first lesson were very young, and some of them had never skied before, so I wasn't holding them back from anything. Just trying to get across how insanely busy it was. I think everyone on a 100 kilometers radius was on the hill and booking last-minute lessons. Needless to say, the cafeteria was just as packed. I was still standing in line for my hot dog when I got my mom's text saying she was parking. I should preface this by saying that there were more instructors this year than there were coats for the instructors, so I was borrowing one from one of the managers on vacation, leading to a complete confusion among parents. There was a name tag on it that was not my name, and had to turn it in after my last lesson every day, meaning I was wearing my yellow striped jacket that I think is actually a child's XXL because of how short it is, but it was secondhand, is an expensive brand and fits, so who cares? I finally get to the checkout and grab my chocolate bar as I hand the cashier my employee badge, which looks very similar to a seasonal pass, so that she can apply my discount. I should also mention that the cafeteria area is all, so we were packed like sardines, but it was not so near the cashiers, so I'm really not sure why this lady was standing close enough to me to read the discount on the bill I was handed. I'm paranoid and always check it before leaving. Big mistake. This woman shoves her kid up right into me and hands her her card saying, "You pay," then turns to the cashier and says, "We want the child discount," in a sickly sweet voice. I'm confused. The cashier is confused. The other instructors in front of me are confused. We are a ski hill known for our ski school. It would go out of business if there were a child discount. The cashier finally says, "We don't have a child discount." "Yes, you do," the lady says, shoving her terrified kid, my guess is 9 years old, towards the counter. She then points at me. "Sure got the child discount." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but she works here." "No, she doesn't." The lady, from here on L, points to the other instructors. "They do. This child is not even old enough to work here." I kinda nod and shrug and eat my hot dog. This really isn't my problem, at least I didn't think so, and I wasn't quite ready to leave yet as I needed some hands to get my skis into our car. I then stood by a wall because there was no sitting space left as the cashier from here on C brought up the total. "Where's the discount?" "I told you there is no discount," the cashier said calmly. She waves arms like a mad person and points to me, stuffing my face. "She got one. My daughter should get one too. She works here." "No, she does not." I finally get annoyed with this and tell her that I do, in fact, work here, as an instructor. "No, you do not. You are too young to work here, and anyone can see that you are lying. You're not wearing an instructor's coat." "Yeah, 'cause I clocked out." "See, you aren't working. I want the child discount." "There is no child discount." "Then what discount did she get?" She points an accusatory finger at me. The cashier is getting really annoyed now, the employee one. "But she said she isn't working." At this point, the people behind her are pretty upset, and some are telling her to pay and move on. The lady starts pointing at my employee card that's hanging between my pop and chocolate and starts saying that's it, just like her kid's pass. I'm now at the end of my wits and show her where it says "employee" on the card. She turns red, then demands that I give it to her for her child to use. I simply inform her that I am not allowed to share it with anyone and leave. Before you ask, I have no idea what happened next. I applied late, part of why I didn't get my own jacket, and didn't know if this needed to be reported or not. But no one got hurt, and I assume she paid and went on her way. I never saw her again. Story 3. I was at a stop sign around lunchtime when a woman on the corner suddenly came running over to the passenger side of my car, loudly insisting that she needed to get home. I was driving a convertible with the top down. She didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she swung a leg over the door and plopped herself into the passenger seat, saying she would give me $5 for gas. She mentioned that she lived in a nearby low-income public housing project. I knew where it was since it was about 1.5 miles away. She seemed a little jittery and nervous, but somehow also appeared fairly harmless. She never even glanced at me, didn't look like she was plotting anything, and never said another word after that. So here's the part where you can all call me out for being careless. I figured it was easier to just drive 1.5 miles out of my way than deal with the stress of trying to get her out of my car. My backup plan, in case of a carjacking, has always been to drive into the first telephone pole I see or rear-end the first police car I spot, since airbags would deploy and keep me safe. I figured it would be better to deal with the aftermath of that than to risk being harmed or left in an alley. When I arrived at the housing project, it was broad daylight, and I was parked right in front of the main entrance with plenty of people around, so I didn't feel like I was in danger. She hopped out and ran off. I wouldn't have accepted the $5 even if she had offered, which she didn't, but I was annoyed that she left the passenger door wide open. I got out to walk around and close it when an older man in a silver pickup truck pulled up. He rolled down his passenger window and asked if I knew that woman and whether I was okay. I told him, "No idea who she is, but yes, I'm fine." He explained that he had been driving down the street behind me when he saw that woman suddenly jump into my car. Concerned, he decided to follow me just in case something suspicious was about to happen. I was genuinely stunned by his thoughtfulness and told him, "Wow, thank you. That was a really kind and considerate thing to do." He responded firmly, saying, "I would have thrown that woman right out of my truck." Then he pointed a finger at my face and gave me a stern lecture, almost like I was one of his kids. "Don't ever do that again." I couldn't help but laugh nervously and replied, "Yes, sir." Of course, he was absolutely right. If something like that ever happens again, and hopefully it never will, I might just follow his advice and not allow it to happen in the first place. But just think about the level of entitlement it takes to climb into a stranger's car without permission simply because you need a ride. Honestly, if she had chosen the wrong vehicle, things could have turned out a lot worse for her. Story 4. Some time ago, I had a job as a runner for a small, low-budget horror movie company. Part of my job as a runner was to go to the bank to make various deposits and withdrawals for both the company and the boss. I went to the bank almost every day, sometimes multiple times in a single day. The bank was located in a very upscale neighborhood, so it was not uncommon to see expensive high-end cars in the nearby lot where I usually parked. The lot was not free if you were just parking to walk around the area, but you could get validation if you went to certain specific businesses, like the bank a few buildings away. At this point, I had been at my job for about 3.5 years, which meant I had been to this lot easily around 1,000 times. I knew a lot of the workers in the area by name, including the parking lot attendants. We talked often, and many times I could get away with not getting validation, even on days when I wasn't working. I was in my mid-20s and was often dressed in shorts, flip-flops, and a merchandise shirt from my company. We didn't have uniforms, so they just gave me a ton of shirts from their movies, so I would have some kind of identifier while I was out working. Now, I should mention that I am Hispanic with fairly dark skin. Normally, I wouldn't even bring that up because, honestly, who should care? But you know who does care? Certain entitled people. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of veiled prejudice and stereotyping. Even at that parking lot, I've been asked multiple times if I could park people's cars. They usually apologized and looked embarrassed when I pointed out the actual attendants, the ones wearing polo shirts and vests with the parking company's logo on them. So, most of the time, I would just roll my eyes and go about my day. Occasionally, though, I would run into someone rude who would snap their fingers at me, which I strongly dislike, or toss their keys at me. In those moments, I usually got a bit snarky, but nothing major. On this particular day, I was in a rather poor mood. My company had started to do some questionable things and was mistreating employees. A lot of people hadn't been paid in weeks, and I was only getting partial paychecks. The only reason I got any money at all was because the main part of my job required me to drive anywhere from 4 to 12 hours a day, and I couldn't do that without gas. They reimbursed me for gas on top of my paycheck, so at least I had that. On my way to the bank that day, I bought a strawberry smoothie for lunch, since I knew there was no chance I was going to make it back to the office in time to eat the food I had brought. I pulled into the non-valet section of the lot, chatted with the attendant while grabbing my ticket, and then started walking towards the bank. That's when I heard someone shouting, "Jose. Hey, Jose." Obviously, I ignored it, because my name is not Jose. I walked past the woman who was shouting when suddenly I felt something hit me in the back of the head, knocking my glasses off. I bent down to pick up my glasses, turned around, and saw a red-faced woman glaring at me with anger. I was absolutely shocked and frustrated. I looked down to see what had hit me, and, of course, it was her car and house keys. This lady had actually thrown her keys at the back of a stranger's head. She was driving a very nice Cadillac Escalade that looked like it was probably fully loaded and regularly detailed. I picked up her keys and shouted, "What the heck, lady?" She shouted back, "Didn't you hear me calling you? It's your own fault for ignoring me. I'm late for my hair appointment. Park my car right now." I was absolutely stunned. I tried to explain to her that I didn't work there, but she refused to listen. Every time I opened my mouth, she interrupted me with something even more demeaning, questioning my intelligence and insisting I was lying. She even threatened to get me fired from a job I didn't have. She started walking away, so I thought to myself, forget it. I hurried over to the restaurant next door and called out, "Hey!" She turned around, her face nearly steaming with frustration. I took a deep breath, kept my voice as calm as I could, and said, "I don't work here." Then, without another word, I dropped her keys into my half-full smoothie cup and tossed it into the restaurant's dumpster. The look on her face when the cup exploded into pink chunks and her keys disappeared into that dirty dumpster was priceless. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most satisfying things I had ever witnessed. I walked away, still irritated, but also amused, while she ran back to the attendants in a panic. After finishing my business at the bank, I returned to the lot and saw her shouting at the security guard while pointing directly at me. The guard, who of course knew me well, asked me what had happened. I explained calmly that she had thrown her keys at me, shouted at me, and refused to take them back when I tried to explain that I wasn't an employee. I also admitted that I had dropped them into my smoothie and tossed them into the trash. The guard was clearly struggling not to laugh by the time I finished. She then demanded that he call the police on me, but he explained that she had willingly given me her keys and refused to listen when I tried to tell her the truth. He also reminded her that the lot clearly had signs posted saying they were not responsible for lost or stolen property. She then demanded that one of the workers climb into the dumpster to retrieve her keys. He shook his head and pointed at the sign again. To make matters worse for her, he informed her that her Escalade was blocking traffic into the lot, and that if she didn't move it within 15 minutes, it would be towed. She did not take that well and went on a loud rant, but the guard simply stood there silently until she was finished. When she finally stopped, he looked at his watch and said politely, "You now have 7 minutes, ma'am." Sure enough, she angrily trudged off toward the dumpster. The guard and I shared a good laugh, though he warned me not to do that again. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught sight of her climbing into the dumpster, furiously tossing trash around in a desperate search for her keys. I honked, waved, and drove away with a big grin on my face. The next day, one of the lot attendants told me that they ended up towing her Escalade. Apparently, she never found her keys. I couldn't help but laugh, though I imagine her hairdresser might not have been thrilled about her showing up late and smelling like garbage. I don't know about the legality of what I did, or if I would have been in actual trouble if the police had gotten involved. But she caught me on a bad day, and I don't regret it one bit. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: don't treat people poorly, and don't assume strangers exist to serve you. Story 5. Hey, so this story is a couple of different things these people have done off the top of my head over the years, but there have been other moments that I can't think of right now, but I'm sure I will at some point. Now, thankfully, these people aren't actually related to us, but the main girl of this story is the mother of my nieces and nephew. So the mother was throwing a birthday party for my nephew. It was his first birthday at the time, so it was a pretty big deal. I sadly couldn't attend because I had to go to a funeral. Anyway, my mom, being the overly helpful person that she is, asked if there's anything she could bring. She was talking about a few drinks or extra plates or something. The mother sent her a shopping list of 20 things or more, and all I could do was gap when my mom complained about all she had to get that weekend. And then my mother told me a few things she had to get, like oyster dip or clam dip. Does she know this is an infant's birthday? Who brings that to an infant's birthday? I asked. I was convinced that the mother had sent my mother her shopping list instead of just birthday stuff, but my mom went ahead and got everything on it. They went to the party, and I was told it looked more suited for a cocktail party instead of a child's birthday. My mom told me later that not a single thing on the food table looked kid-friendly like you would find at a birthday. Not one thing was something a kid would actually eat, and several things my mother bought weren't even out but closed off in the fridge, including the dip. My grandma commented that she had bought them the turkey that was the centerpiece at the party that was like $100. I mean, is it normal to have a centerpiece? Especially a turkey for an infant's birthday? I always had pizza and cake growing up on my birthdays, so that whole thing threw me off. My mom said she was just gonna put the dreadful party behind her. Till a few days later, the mom made a comment on Facebook. Apparently, she thanked her entire family for helping out with the party. Her mom, grandma, and sister who showed up to help in like the last 10 minutes of them decorating. My parents and grandma who literally paid for the entire food table that was barely touched despite it all being exactly what she asked for, wasn't even mentioned. And all because we weren't able to get there before the party to help decorate, even though we were never asked to help out. Apparently the mom just expected us to show up and offer. My mom was pissed as hell, and it took my dad to calm her down so she wouldn't blast her back on Facebook. Another story about this family. This one is about the mom of the mom in the previous story. I'm just going to call her Grams so you can easily tell the difference. Well, at the time, the mom was living with my cousin, and they asked my cousin's mom, my aunt, for money to pay for bills. She told them no. Grams blasted our entire family on Facebook, saying how she just finished paying all of the mom's bills and how some people refused to help despite going out to eat every night. Now, I don't know what that has to do with anything because that wasn't even about my aunt. That was about my family, and we didn't even know this was going on until my aunt showed us the post. I admit, we do go out most nights, but I'm confused about the part where how we spend our money is any of this lady's business, especially since it's not our responsibility to pay someone else's bills. My aunt blasted her back all on Facebook, basically telling her to get lost, and that he will happily take back her almost 30-year-old son in and let him stay in her house. But if they move out, then it's their responsibility to be able to afford it, which everyone expected it to be short-lived since he refused to even look for a job. That as grown adults living on their own, it's not her responsibility to be expected to pay their bills every month. It's one thing to ask for help, but they were expecting everyone in the family to pay for them, while they sat at home and didn't even look for work, so of course, she told them no after they asked so many times. Story 6. I ran a charitable event for my work around this time last year. We usually put on a carnival to raise money for charity and raise awareness of our company, establish ourselves in the community, attract customers, but all the money goes to charity. So I stood up at the carnival and gave a big speech about the importance of the charity and how the cause was personal to me and my family. It funded cerebral palsy research that particular year, and my father lives with it. I was very visible throughout the whole event, sharing my story and raising money and running carnival booths, etc. Fast forward to a couple months ago, I bumped into someone while in line to get coffee who said they'd met me at that event last year. We ended up starting a pleasant conversation, so sat outside to drink our coffees together. In hindsight, she seemed a little off, a little tightly wound, but it didn't register over such a brief encounter. She mentioned how she had been so glad to see a large-scale cerebral palsy charity event and hadn't seen us do any events since. I had started to explain the yearly nature of the carnival and how we picked different charities, but she, unintentionally, cut me off, caught up in her own emotions, as she began to recount a moving story about a sibling who suffered from the condition. I was telling her how terrible that was and how I completely understood in reference to my own experiences. Before I could really get into talking about my own story, she checked the clock and said she didn't realize how much time had passed and she needed to go, but she appreciated the work I did and my support listening to her, etc. She began fumbling in her purse for her keys. Then, as she was leaving, she said, "And here's a little something to support your work," producing something folded in a napkin from her purse and leaving it at my side. I'm an interior designer, so I had no idea what she could be talking about in terms of supporting my work, but we were seated just by the street parking, so she was gone too quickly for me to ask. I unfolded the napkin, and to my shock, she had slipped $100 into the napkin. I was dumbfounded with confusion as to why this perfect stranger would give me any money to support my work in commercial interior design, without getting anything designed in exchange. It took me a while to figure it out, but I eventually realized she must have come to the carnival and assumed the charity itself had put on the event. So thought I worked for them, not an interior design firm. It took me 10-15 minutes to realize, so it was far too late to try and catch up to her, and all we'd exchanged were first names. I didn't even know where she worked. So, without any hopes of tracking her down, I figured the best thing to do would be to just donate the money to the charity. I did, and that was that. Fast forward to last month. Somehow or another this woman came to realize I don't work for the charity, but am in fact in the for-profit sector. I think it is because I was featured in an online ad the firm's been running. She left a message on my work phone, half angry, half embarrassed, saying she was willing to forego holding me accountable if I paid her back in full. Problem is I didn't have the money anymore. I donated it. I explained this to her, but she wanted proof. I left her a message. She didn't pick up when I called, explaining the company ran a carnival event to raise money for the charity, but that we aren't the charity ourselves, and that I absolutely did donate her money to the charity so she could rest assured. I didn't hear anything back for about 3 days. On the 4th day after I'd left the message, the police showed up to our firm's headquarters. We're almost all working remotely because of COVID, so they unduly terrified our teenage receptionist. I was also scared half to death, because I had to have a serious meeting with my boss in which she asked if I had misrepresented myself as a charitable worker and collected donations in a personal capacity because of the claims this woman made to our business. When I explained, my boss blew her off, and that's when she got the police involved. This woman called and said we were masquerading as a charity, scamming people out of money, so the police came to confirm we were operating a legitimate business. They saw nothing out of the ordinary, obviously, and that was that. Or so we thought. Fast forward to a week later. My boss got a letter from a lawyer. I don't know exactly what it said, but it accused us of scamming this woman and demanding her money be returned. I wish I could have just provided proof of the donation, but I have thousands of emails. I deleted most of them, and I could not for the life of me find the confirmation email that reflected my donation. So, instead, my boss made another $100 donation to the charity and took a screenshot and sent it to the lawyer. We haven't heard from her, the lawyer, since, so I don't think she was wild about representing this woman in the first place. We have still gotten a couple wild phone calls from the woman saying since the date on the $100 donation is so recent, it means we still had the money and we should have returned it to her when she asked why, if she wanted to donate it to charity anyways. My boss explaining we donated it the first time, and this was a second donation to assuage her concerns has not helped. Eventually, we just blocked her number. Worst part is, due to COVID, we aren't having a carnival this year, so she'll be even more convinced we were making the whole thing up.